Hey guys, welcome back to new video, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can use Google sign in your Kotlin multi-platform projects. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So first thing first, we have to register our application in the Firebase because we are going to use Firebase as a backend for our project. So for that, first thing first, open up your Firebase console and you can create any project. By the way, I have already created this project, so I'm going to simply open up this project. And in this project, open up the project overview, and in this project overview, as you can see, I have already registered two different applications. So here we have add app, so I'm gonna click on this. This is an Android app, so click on this Android app icon, and here we have to give the Android package name, nickname, and the signing certificate. So for that, go to your project. By the way, you will get this project from my GitHub repository. Link is in the description box. In this particular project, I have given you all the dependencies that we will use in this project. Open up your shared module, and in this shared module, we have build.gradle.kts script. Open up this script, and as you can see at the bottom, we have Android closure, and in this Android closure, we have our namespace. So simply copy up this namespace, come back to your Firebase console, and you can paste it over here, your package name. Next, the Android nickname. So I'm going to call this Google login with KMP. And lastly, we have to mention our signing certificate, or you can say SHA1 key. So for that, open up your terminal. So first I'm going to clear all of the terminal things, and after that I'm going to execute a task /gradlew sign in report and press enter. So as you can see, it will give you all the information, but we are only interested in SHA1. So simply copy up this SHA1 key. Go back to your console and simply paste it over here, and at the leading, I think I have taken an extra space. Okay, so register your application. Okay, so we have Google Services JSON that contains all of the IDs. Download it. Come back to your project. Open up your Android app, and in this Android app, you can drag and drop that file. Okay, yes, I want to move it. Okay, so we have our Google Services.json file that contains all of the ID information. So let's begin with our Google sign-in journey for Android application, and after that we will do with iOS. So for the Android, open up your shared module source package that contains three different sub package: Android main, common main, and iOS main. So everything that we will write for Android will goes into Android main. So in this, first thing first, I'm going to create a class, and the class name is Google Authenticator. And in this class, I'm going to pass two things. First, I'm going to pass the context, and next I'm going to pass the credential manager. So credential manager. Make sure this credential manager is coming from androidx.credential.credential manager. And let me show you the dependencies. So in your build.gradle.kts of your shared module, I have added all the dependencies for Android main. And yes, come back to your Google Authenticator, and now let's begin our journey with login. So I'm going to create a function naming login, and in this login, first I'm going to write the configuration. So this configuration is actually used to show our user the Gmail accounts that they have in their mobile device. So you can decide the configuration, and I'm going to call this Google ID option. We have here get Google ID option dot builder, and in this first we have to set this server client ID because this request goes to our Google server. So Google server need this server client ID to verify whether this client ID is genuine or not. And after that, it will grab all of the information regarding to your Gmail and show you in a form of bottom sheet, and that bottom sheet contain all of your Gmail accounts. You will get this server client ID from your Google Services.json. So scroll up at the top, we have here client array, and in this client array we have OAuth client array. This is our client ID. So simply copy this thing, come back to Google Authenticator and paste in here. Next we have set auto select enable. No, I don't want it. Next we have set filter by authorized account, and also I don't want it. lastly build it. By the way, if you want to know what is the use case of this, you can watch my previous video that I have created for credential manager to perform Google authentication in Android. Okay, so now we have Google ID configuration. Next, we have to create a request. This request goes to our Google server, and I'm going to call this request. We have here get credential request dot builder, and in this builder I'm going to add my configuration, which is Google ID option, and lastly build it. So now we have request, and after that, if we have request, that means this request goes to our backend server. So for that we'll use credential manager. So credential manager dot get credential, pass your context and the request. So this request goes to our Google server, and it will of course return me a result. This is a suspendable function, so make sure to use here suspend function login. As you can see, we are receiving here get credential response. So I'm going to store that information into my result, and we'll do some checks. So first we are going to check the result dot credential. Okay, so this credential contain the information regarding the credential. So I want to create a variable, and the variable name is credential. Use your result dot credential, and now I'm going to use this credential. So credential, if it is a type of custom credential and credential type is equivalent to Google ID token credential dot type Google ID token credential, then only will proceed. Now in this I want to grep few information which is related to Google ID token credential. So we have Google ID token credential, and we have function naming create from. So use this create from, pass your credential data into it. As you can see, it will give you Google ID token credential, and in this we are only interested in this token, and this token is used by our Firebase backend to get information from the Google server. So use Google ID token credential ID token. Now we have ID token, and it's time to perform the Firebase sign-in operation. So for that we require auth credential, and using this auth credential our Firebase will eventually sign up the user. So for that I'm gonna use here Google Auth provider get credential, and in this you can pass your token, and next parameter is null. So we have auth credential, and it's time to create an instance of our Firebase. So use your Firebase authentication dot get instance. Now we do have a Firebase authentication instance. Use your Firebase dot sign in with credential, and the requirement of this thing is auth credential that we have been already created over here. Okay, I'm using here await, and this will give me the information regarding the user. I'm going to store this information in user variable, and lastly I'm going to return user dot display name and convert this thing in a form of a string. By the way, our login has no return type, so I'm gonna use here return type string. And also because there are some network request involvement, due to that reason it will might throw an exception in future. So I'm gonna use here try catch, and we have a general exception. And also if user haven't signed in any email account in their device, then we have one more type of exception, which is no credential exception. Next we have one more type of exception, which is get credential exception. This exception arises when our credential throw any kind of exception. Okay, so I'm gonna return here this same exception. Okay, simply copy this thing up, paste in here, and also here I'm gonna use e.message to string. And next we have no credential exception. So if user doesn't have any kind of Gmail account in their account, so I'm gonna call this no email found in your device. Okay, and I will return it. Cut this thing out from here and paste in the try, and at the end I'm gonna return something went wrong. Okay, so yes, we are done with our login. Now if you want to perform logout, it's very easy, because we want to perform a logout from our Firebase. And if you want to perform logout from your Firebase, it's very easy. You can simply use Firebase authentication get instance and perform sign out. So we are pretty much done with the Android Google Authenticator. It's time to use it. So for that, go to your Android app, source, Java, And in the main activity, first I'm going to remove all this thing, greeting view 2, and here I'm going to create a column, and this column have a modifier fill max size, and its vertical arrangement is on the center and its horizontal alignment is also on the center. Now in this we have a button, and button has on click event, and in its UI I'm gonna simply use a text which says Google log in, and when user click on it I'm gonna use my Google Authenticator. So for that, let me create my Google Authenticator. Remember, Google Authenticator requirement of this thing is context and the credential manager, because we don't have a dependency for credential manager in our Android app. So first I'm going to add dependencies. Open up your build Gradle of shared module, and these are the credential dependencies. So I'm going to simply copy these dependencies, come back to our Android app build.gradle.kts and paste in here, sync it. Go back to your main activity, and yeah, I think we have credential manager in this particular module. Now I'm gonna use local context.current to get the context, pass the context, and next the credential manager. So credential manager dot create pass your context. Okay, so I think I have misspelled it. Okay, so now we have our Google Authenticator, and we'll need one more state, and the state name is the name. I'm gonna use remember saveable mutable state of empty string. Just import this thing, and now it's time to use this name too. So I'm using here a text, and in this text I'm gonna pass the name, and even when user click on this button, I'm gonna use my Google Authenticator login to perform login. As login is a suspend function, we'll use here coroutine block to execute a suspendable function. So for that, I'm gonna create here a scope, initialize this thing with remember coroutine scope and use it. Instead of using pair of parentheses, I'm using a small bracket. Use your scope, launch it, and in this launch you can simply use your Google Authenticator.login, and eventually it will update your name. Alright, so yeah, we are pretty much done. Now go to your Android main manifest, and here make sure to take internet permission, because as I told you, there are some network requests going on. Alright, so now I'm gonna execute this application in my physical device, because my physical device contain Gmail accounts. So execute it. Okay, so when I click Google login, so we have this Gmail account in my device, and when I click any of them, okay, so we have a problem, and the problem is Firebase app is not initialized in this process. So the problem is I haven't used Google Services plugin in my Android app. So to use that plugin, go to your build Gradle KTS and simply paste this plugin and sync your project. Okay, so now I'm gonna re-execute my Android app, and yeah, this is my visor Google login. Let me use a random in one. Okay, so here you can see random in one. Alright, so open up the authentication. As you can see, random in one. That means yes. So first we'll see the bottom sheet that contains all of our Gmail information. This information comes from our Google Cloud server. Okay, and after that, when we get the information which we want from the Google Cloud server, we'll use those information to register our user in the Firebase backend. So this is our backend. And yeah, by using this approach, you can perform Google sign-in in your Android app of your KMP projects. Now it's time to begin with our iOS and see how we can perform Google sign-in in our iOS app. So for the iOS, first we need to, of course, install dependencies. So in iOS, we'll use Cocoapods, which will manage all of our dependencies. And just like in our Android, we'll use dependencies in our Gradle script to download information from remote source. Similarly, in iOS, we'll use pods, and these pods will actually use to install the library or information or the piece of code that you might use into your iOS project. So let's see how we can install those things in our iOS application for this KMP project. So first thing first, let's open the iOS app. Okay, and in this iOS app we have pod file, just like we have Gradle file for Android. And in this pod file, by the way, this is something which is added by me. This is used to bypass some minor error that is coming up with my Xcode. Okay, so for the time being, just ignore it. Right, now let's say I want to install pod. So for pod, we'll use here pod, and in this pod use here single quotes, and in this single quote I want to install Google sign in. Okay, and the next pod I want to install regarding the Firebase. So we have here Firebase / auth. Okay, so now we have mentioned these two pods. It's time to install these pods. So for that, open up your terminal and simply clear this terminal. Make sure that you will point to this iOS directory. So for the time being, we are not pointing towards the iOS app. We are pointing towards our root, which is Google sign in. So I'm going to use here cd iOS app. Now we are pointing to this iOS app directory, and in this I'm going to use here pod install to install all of the pods. As you can see, it is installing the Firebase app check, interoperability, Firebase authentication, Google sign in, Google utilities, and reCAPTCHA interop. Okay. Next, we have to download the pods for our Kotlin Multiplatform, or you can say for the shared code. So to do that, open up your buildgradle.kts. As you can see in here, I have already added this Google sign in. Similarly, we'll require Firebase authentication. So to add Firebase authentication in our shared code base, I'm going to install one more pod, and this is our pod. This extra option is actually used to remove few compile time errors. That's why I'm using here extra options. Now simply sync your project. Open up this build. As you can see, it is downloading right now. Just wait for a moment. Alright, so syncing is done. So now we are good to go with our iOS app. So open up your iOS main, and in this iOS main, I'm gonna create a class, and the class name is again Google Authenticator. And in this class, I'm gonna create a function, and the function name is login. And I'm using here suspended coroutine. And the result is string, type is nullable, and in this we are receiving continuation. So continuation. Right, make sure this function is suspendable function. So first thing first, I want to grep the root view UI controller, because we are going to show a bottom sheet. So in order to show a bottom sheet in your iOS application, we require some view, and for that I'm gonna grep the root UI view. So I'm gonna call this a root UI view, and I'm using here UI application dot its shared application, and in this we have key windows that contains our root view controller. Next, I'm gonna check root view. If it is equivalent to null, on that case I'm gonna use continuation and resume this thing with null. Make sure this is imported, else I'm going to perform my Google sign in. So to perform Google sign in, we use here a GID sign in. We have this shared instance, and by the way, this is some foreign API. So we have to annotate our class with experimental foreign API. Now we have here sign in with presenting view controller. So I'm going to use this, and as I already fetched the root UI view, so I'm going to use here a root UI view, and in this we are receiving two things. We are receiving the error and the actual Google options, and in this pair of parentheses we are receiving the GID results and NS error. So I'm going to call this GID results. As you can see, GID sign in result and NS error. So yes, if our NS error is not equivalent to null, on that case I'm going to simply print here a message, something went wrong. If our NS error is null, that means we are receiving GID result. So first thing first, I'm gonna grep the token. So use your GID sign in result, and in this we have user, and this user contains our ID token. Okay, so now we do have our ID token. Next, I'm gonna take the profile from this GID sign in result. So GID sign in result dot user dot profile. So now we do have ID token and the user profile. Now if our ID token is not equivalent to null, that means yes, we are actually seeing the bottom sheet that has all of the Gmail accounts that your device will have right now. Else, if we don't receive the ID token, that means we will perform some kind of wrong implementation, or our server might throw any kind of exception or error. So in this case, I'm gonna use my continuation and resume with null. Okay, so now we do have our ID token. Now it's time to use our Firebase to actually register our user on our Firebase backend. So for that, I'm going to create a function at the bottom, which is register user on Firebase, and we require the ID token because this ID token is actually used by our Firebase backend to go on the Google server and grab the information. So due to that reason, we have to pass this ID token to our Firebase. So now in this, I'm going to take the Firebase auth, FIR. As you can see, we have a lot of options in here, but we are actually interested in FIR auth dot. We have authentication, so this will give me FIR auth. Of course, this is an experimental foreign API, so simply opt in this experimental foreign API. So now we have Firebase authentication. It's time to generate the auth credential that we had been generating for our Android. Similarly, we will generate that auth credential for our iOS app, and this credential is actually used by our Firebase to register this particular user. Credential FIR auth provider. Okay, so we have here FIR OAuth provider. In this we have credential with. As you can see, we have a lot of options in here, but we are interested in the credential with provider ID, and in this we have to pass our ID token. And the next thing we have to pass, so first we have to pass the provider ID, which is com.google, next the ID token, and yeah, this will give us the credential. Now simply use Firebase auth, and in this we have sign in with credential. Here you can see sign in with credential, and in this credential I'm gonna pass my credential. Now I'm gonna open a pair of parentheses, and in this open of pair of parentheses we will receive two different things. Second, we have NS error, and first one we have the actual result. As you can see, Firebase authentication data result. So I'm gonna use this. So if our NS error is not equivalent to null, that means we are receiving some kind of error. I'm simply printing something went wrong, and at the end, or you can say at the suffix of this string, I'm gonna use this NS error message. Else, I'm gonna take the user from this Firebase authentication data result. We have here user, so it will give me the Firebase FIR user. Next, I'm gonna use this name. So we have here variable naming display name user dot, we have display name, and this is a nullable, so use here question mark operator, and at the end I'm gonna use the continuation. So if you want to use continuation, you can simply pass that continuation in here. So if we have ID token, will register this user on the Firebase, pass the ID token, and next the continuation. So as you can see, the type of continuation is continuation, and the type of that continuation is string. So use here continuation. We have continuation type of this thing is a string, which is nullable. Simply use this continuation dot resume with. In this we have to pass result dot success, and I'm gonna use my display name. So yeah, that's it. So first, this piece of code is actually used to show the bottom sheet that contains all of the Gmail account that user's device will have, and if user click any of them, will fetch the ID token from our Google Cloud server. We will pass that ID token to our Firebase backend. This Firebase backend will use that ID token to communicate with our Google server, and once it will perform all the operation with our Google Cloud Server, it will eventually register that user in our Firebase backend. Alright, so that's it. Okay, so we receive here an error. Requirement of this thing is a string, but we are sending actually the GRD token. So just use here token string. And yeah, we are pretty much done with our Google Authenticator for iOS application. Now it is time to set up all of the key things for our iOS application. So to do that, I'm gonna open up my project into Xcode. Alright, so I have opened iOS application in Xcode. So we have iOS app and we have pods that contains all of our Firebase thing and Google sign-in things. In iOS app, we have iOS group that has iOS app.swift file. So this is a starting point. It's equivalent to the application class that we have in Android. Right, so first we have to register our iOS application in Firebase so that we can register our user. So to do that, this is our Firebase console, and simply click on this project overview. You are going to see this kind of user interface. Click on this plus, because this time I want to use iOS app. So click on this iOS. So we have to give the app bundle ID. For that, go to your Xcode, click on this iOS app, and here we have bundle identifier. So simply copy this bundle identifier, come back to your browser and paste in here. Next you can give the name. So I'm gonna call this iOS Google sign in KMP, and yeah, rest of thing just leave it. Register this application, download the Google service -info.plist file. It is equivalent to Google services.json. So download it, open up your Xcode, and simply drag this thing, this info.plist file, in your iOS app. I mean somewhere here. Okay, so this will contain all of the required things. As you can see, we have client ID, we have reverse client ID, Android client ID, etc. Go back to your Firebase console. Next. Okay, so we'll use this thing later. Just click on the next and continue to our console. Okay, so here you can see we have now 4 different applications. This is our iOS Google sign in KMP. This is the one that we have just integrated. So click on it, and yes, this is our app, and we have already downloaded this Google services info.plist file in our Xcode. Okay, so now we have to do few things in order to open up that bottom sheet which contain all of the Gmail account information in our iOS. So to do that, click on this iOS app, click on this target, open up info, and in this info we are going to add one more information. So click on this plus, and here I'm gonna give the name GID client ID. You can get this client ID from your Google services info plist file. This is our client ID. So simply copy this thing up, go back to your target. We have here GID client ID, and corresponding to that, simply paste its value in here. Okay, so we are done with our GID client ID. Next we have to add URL type, as you can see in here. So you can get this URL type from again Google services info.plist file. This is reverse client ID. So simply copy this reverse client ID, come back to your target. We have here URL types, click on this plus, and simply paste here URL schemas. And yeah, we are pretty much done with the basic setup. Okay, so now it's time to use the Google Authenticator that we have been created in our shared module iOS sub package. So we have here content view, and in this content view I'm gonna create my Google Authenticator. And make sure that you have imported the shared module. Okay, so we have a problem, and the problem is circular reference. Okay, so we have a problem, and the problem is circular reference. I think I'm giving the wrong name. Okay, now it works. Okay, so now in this body I'm going to create a wish tag, and in this wish tag we have a button. So in place of label I'm going to use here text, and this text will say Google sign in. Okay, so when user click on this button, I'm gonna use my Google Authenticator dot login function. So Google Authenticator dot login. Okay, this is a suspendable function. So if you want to execute a suspendable function in iOS, we'll use here task. Cut this thing out from here and paste within this task. And because it's a suspendable function in iOS, we'll use await. Okay, and it will eventually return me a result. Alright, so sometime it might throw an exception, and due to that reason I'm gonna use here try catch. So in iOS we'll use do catch. Now cut this thing and paste in this do. Okay, use here try. So simply try this thing. If it is throwing any kind of exception, you can simply catch those exception in this catch block. And also I want to use here guard. So guard let result this login, else if it will return null, else I'm gonna return. Okay, so now we do have a result. So I want to show this result that contain display name. I want to show this display name to our user. So for that I'm gonna use here an state private variable naming name, and initial value is empty string. So just on top of our button I'm gonna use this name. And yes, if we got any kind of exception, again I'm gonna simply update my name with something went wrong. Okay, and if we receive this result, I'm gonna use my name and update this name with result. Alright, so yes, we are pretty much done with our iOS. So in this body I'm using a very simple Swift UI. So when user click on this button, we're gonna hit this login method, and when we receive any kind of result, we'll simply update that name state which is present in our content view. And yeah, that's it. Now I'm gonna execute this application in iOS platform. Okay, so it is working. Now when I click this Google sign in, okay, so continue, it will fetch. Okay, so I don't have any kind of Gmail account in this iPhone simulator. Due to that reason, it will ask me to add one account. So I'm gonna add here. Okay, so now when I click continue, okay, so we have a problem, and the problem is related to the Firebase authentication. So we have to do some additional setup for iOS application to use Firebase authentication. This is the problem, so let's fix it. So now I'm going to execute our iOS application. Alright, so build is succeeded, and when I click to this Google sign in, we're gonna see an alert. I want to continue. I want to choose my Google account random in one and click on continue. Alright, so we have an error, and the error is regarding the setup of Firebase authentication in our iOS application. So let's see how we can do the initial setup so that we can access Firebase authentication in our iOS application. Well, it's very straightforward. So when we are registering this iOS application in our Firebase console, we'll get a chunks of code, and I'm gonna use the same code in here. So open up your iOS app.swift file, and in this I'm gonna paste those code. So first we have to paste this code, and after that we're gonna add a delegate. And yes, we are pretty much done. So that's all for the Firebase authentication setup in our iOS application. Now I'm gonna re-execute this application. Okay, so build is succeeded. Google sign in, continue, random in one, continue. Okay, so we have an error, and this time I'm receiving this error, something went wrong, sign in with credential. So this error encountered in here in our shared code base. Over here, as you can see, something went wrong during sign in with presenting view controller. So no, this is not the error that we were encountering. This is the problem that we are seeing currently during the login. So let's see how we can fix it. Actually, it's a very simple fix. Instead of using Fire OAuth provider, we'll use different auth provider which will provide authentication credential. So I'm gonna call this Google, not Google Authenticator, Google Auth provider, and I'm using FIRO. And if you can see, we have here option regarding the Google Auth provider. As you can see, FIR Google Auth provider, I'm gonna use this. And in this we have credential with ID token. And in this parameter, we require two things, ID token and access token. So ID token we are already passing from our function. We have to pass access token. So for that, just add one more parameter naming access token. Type of this thing is string and simply pass that access token in here. Okay, so now we do have our Google Auth product. Now this auth product is a correct one. Remove this credential, paste, copy this thing, paste in over here. So we have to pass this access token in our registered user on Firebase. So let's do that. This access token is actually coming from our GID sign-in result dot user question mark dot we have access token in here. So access token, I want to get its string, convert this thing into string so that it will not throw any kind of exception. Cool. So we pass ID token and the access token. And right now we are good to go. But before executing our application, I'm going to show you a few more information regarding the iOS application. So we have our iOS app in here, and in this iOS app.xcode project, we have project.pbxproj file. And in this xproj file, you can actually change your bundle identifier, because in our console, if you open the project overview and our iOS app, which is this one, iOS Google Sign-in KMP. Notice the bundle ID, Gaur Himanshu YouTube Google Sign-in.iOS app. So simply copy this bundle ID, come back to your Android Studio and change this bundle ID. So we have two different places. Change the first place and also change this second place. Alright, so now I'm gonna re-execute this application. Okay, so build is succeeded. I'm gonna press Google sign in, continue, random in one, continue, and yes, this time we are getting random in one. And when I see this thing in our backend, as you can see, random@gmail.com. That means first we will show the information regarding the Gmail account that our user will have in our iOS application, and when user click any of them, we'll simply register that information in our backend, which is Firebase. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed a lot. It's a very cool video for those who never done Google sign-in in Kotlin Multiplatform project. We will meet in our next video where we will discuss something new about Android. Till that, goodbye.